OK, Ella, the Observer, looking at the Colston statue.
Yeah, I think this was just an interesting way into it because within the Observer they have an sort of semi-interview with Rhiannon Graham, who was one of the Colston Four and has become the kind of spokesperson for the group. And what she's really saying is she's hitting back at the criticism of the jury verdict. And she's saying, don't misuse our acquittals as part of this feeble war on woke. And the interesting thing about it is that I think there's two things going on with the Colston verdict. There is the thing that a lot of people can't get their head around, which is that, as the Observer points out, Graham brought rope to the demonstration. You know, very clearly on footage that was captured of the day, you know, everyone had a phone without filming it. There was lots of evidence that showed that these people were involved in tearing down the statue. And so in relation to the hard law of what constitutes criminal damage or not, I think lots of people are scratching their head and saying, how can a jury have come to this? But the important thing is that the Colston Four, and Graham herself has said that we weren't arguing that we had engaged in criminal damage. In fact, what we were doing was righting the wrongs of history, and that the offensiveness and the abusiveness of the Colston statue remaining in place meant that legally we weren't, in fact, doing criminal damage. We were doing something positive. And I think that's where you have to say that there's two things going on here. There's the legal case, but there's also a political problem, which is that you cannot solve the political culture war issue of statues, of whether or not people want Churchill, whether or not people want Colston. You know, in terms of offensiveness, Oliver Cromwell is outside Houses of Parliament who murdered, you know, countless numbers of my ancestors. I'm Irish. I don't think I'm going to be going down with a rope and pulling him down anytime soon. But the politics of this discussion can't be solved in the court.
But is this why it has to go to the Court of Appeal, not to try to overturn the verdict, but in terms of looking at the precedents of all of this?
Well, the legal arguments that were allowed to be argued.
Yeah, but if she's saying, well, we were righting historical wrongs, well, that does give a carte blanche for other people to do what they want.
Well, it's tricky because jury verdicts don't necessarily set legal precedents. And I feel very strongly that at a time when juries are quite often called into question in relation to other court cases, very much want to defend the idea that a jury of your peers decide what your fate is. That's a kind of fundamental point of our belief in justice and liberty. But the political aspect of this, about the idea that an inanimate object like a statue could inhabit so much emotion of abuse or be so offensive as to warrant this kind of legal decision. That's the interesting thing. And I don't think Suella Braverman's move to get this to the Court of Appeal will change that, because that is a political issue that happens on the streets, that happens among people, and it doesn't get solved by a ruling by a judge.
What do you think of the so-called wokery of it as well? I mean, should there be a committee on every council now looking at their statues or, you know, whatever, that could be causing offence and actually taking a responsible view?
So, you know, lots of people don't like the word woke. Some people think I think it can be a little bit silly. But the idea that that statues or monuments or things that exist in the world can cause us such grievous harm as to be compared with what Colston did, which was engage in the slave trade, and no matter how much he tried to whitewash his decisions his moves afterwards by giving a few quid to the poor, the wrong of that being compared to a statue existing today, I think is a complete perversion. And you end up in a situation in which you paint these Colston Four people are painting the citizens of Bristol as so in need of protection, as so sort of fragile as to be threatened by a statue. And I think that sets quite a dangerous political precedent.
Isn't the bottom line that you shouldn't take the law into your own hands, and all this can be sorted through education, effectively? Educating people about the legacy of Colston and right the historical...
Sometimes you have to, though, don't you? Throughout history, sometimes you have to actually take the law into your own hands to make a point, because nobody will listen.
Well,
statues have been toppled all over the world, and you know, actually at the end of this Observer article, it makes an interesting point, which is that this is part of Colston's history. The statue was put up at a certain time. It's been torn down now. It is a part of history. How we deal with that history, I think, should be more open than it being... You know, I think it leaves a slight sour taste in people's mouth watching these 4 young white kids turn up on the court steps and say, we have won a moment for racial equality.
I still feel the verdict would have been slightly different if those 4 young people happened to be black and wearing hoodies.
Yeah,
that's
very much so.
That's a very fair point.